This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Opsgenie by Atlassian. With Opsgenie, your next incident doesn't stand a chance. Visit Opsgenie.com for your free account. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I wanted to get a panel together to discuss an idea that I had when reading a news article and a news story from last week. I'm not going to point to any particular outlet simply because it was reported multiple places. And that was a story about the reliability of some of the smart speakers and their operating systems. And if you missed it, in short order, Google Home was number one at responding to a series of questions, not commands, by the way, but questions. Some, I think, sports stories, news stories, those kind of things where there were objectively correct answers. Google Home was number one. Siri was number two by a slimmer margin than it had been last year. So Siri has definitely improved. But Google Home took it last year. Alexa was number three, and Cortana was a distant fourth. And it got me to thinking that, okay, the number of questions that could be asked of these things, I mean, it's not quite infinite, but it's pushing that area. And so I'm wondering if we are all expecting a little too much out of our technology. Not just the voice speakers, but everything, because everything is getting more and more complex, and we all get more and more frustrated when something we think should work fails. So here to discuss that with me, or discuss it amongst ourselves, Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Chuck, thanks for inviting me. I look forward to this discussion. I think this will be a really fascinating, very interesting one.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised. That's why I wanted you here, because I know you have some pretty real world, unique views on these things. And speaking of unique views, Mr. Josh Centers is here again as well. Josh, welcome.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck.
Little question there, Josh?
I'm not sure what that was supposed to mean, but okay.
It was nothing but positive, Josh. Believe me.
Well, not a lot of chicken farmers on the panel usually.
Yeah. Has Chuck got you locked in his basement? Is he giving you proper feeding and care?
As long as there's plenty of meat, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. We're off to a fun start, guys. Am I the only one, though, that I guess my reaction was not as much. It wasn't a negative reaction. It was just an interesting reaction. I really wasn't necessarily surprised that Google was number one, because Google has been doing the voice thing for a long time. And Google's a lot more open, as we've discussed ad infinitum on this show, as far as security goes. Siri, it was encouraging to see it, come up in the rankings as far as it did. I've got to be careful here what I say. So Miss A from Amazon was third, and of course Cortana was which, yes, that was my reaction to that too, Mark.
No one is surprised that Cortana is.
I'm laughing because you don't even feel inhibited to disguise it. You just named it outright.
Yeah, that one I wasn't too worried about. Anybody else surprised or have any initial thoughts on these findings?
I was surprised by how low Alexa ranks. I was a little surprised Siri got number two, but then again, I have noticed Siri's gotten a little better over the past year. People gave it a lot of ribbing after the introduction of the HomePod, and I know Apple's had some personnel changes in that department, so they've had a lot of reason and a lot of resources developed to making Siri a lot smarter. In my general experience, I have all three. And actually, I have an Amazon Echo in here now, and I have a Google Home Mini. So we can actually try this out. And, of course, I have Siri right here. In my general, they're all about the same in terms of the voice recognition technology being about equal between all of them. They do have strengths and weaknesses. I think Alexa is generally the most reliable, at least for basic things. But Google can handle.
Sir, I'm not sure.
but Google can handle some more complex tasks, while Siri seems usually a little more focused on maybe things in the Apple ecosystem. Like, for instance, I think when it comes to home automation, I think Siri does it better than anyone because Apple has a better home automation framework than anyone else. What do you guys think? Is that your general impression, or do you have a different idea on that?
Mark, I'll let you jump in.
Well, I only use Siri, so I don't have hands-on experience with Alexa or with Google. I would see the point that, yes, I think in terms of speech recognition, I believe that they're all pretty darn close, although there are strange accents of people I know that you come from one case Brazil or another case from the country of England, and Siri just won't work with any language settings to reliably recognize their voice. So in that regard, it transcends whether it semantically understands what you're asking. If it just can't recognize the basic set of words that you're asking, that's a significant failure. But I think it really indicates that there's many, many, many dimensions to this question. So maybe we can generalize it as the conversation goes on. But I think focusing on just the capabilities of the engines. I'm also well aware that there's quite a family of audio playback quality, which makes me think right away there's also got to be good variance in terms of just the quality of the mic for the pickup. So the question for you, Josh, would be, are the devices roughly similar in terms of size and capabilities, so that you're not really testing their audio pickup capabilities versus their intrinsic voice recognition capabilities?
No, that's a good point. I have a thermostat. It's an Ecobee thermostat that had Alexa built into it. And it's actually improved a bit over the past year, but it has sort of a weak microphone and speaker combination. So I initially wasn't very impressed with Alexa, but now I have an Alexa. I have two Alexas that I basically got for free. One through a pricing error. I got one of those. What was it? The Amazon Echo Show. It's the little circular video screen. I got that for free, and then I got an Echo Spot through a promotion, or the little round one. And I generally find all like between my iPhone, I don't have a HomePod, and there's not really like a HomePod Mini I can compare to, but they all three platforms, my iPhone, the Echo, the two Echoes I have, and the Google Home I have, seem to have equally good voice recognition now. I would say actually Siri is probably a little weaker still in that regard than the rest, because it garbles words all the time. But usually, even for some reason, they have a really hard time understanding me. I don't know if it's a super thick Southern accent I have or what, but it tends to just and that's really the first problem with these things, right? It's not necessarily that they're stupid; it's that they don't hear you correctly. So before you can even get to the intelligence bit, it actually has to understand what you're saying. It seems like they've gotten pretty good at that now, unless you have some kind of wild accent. I'd say they're all pretty even. Siri maybe a little not quite as good as the other two, and we're not going to talk about Cortana. So what's the point?
Right. I mean, it makes me wonder that for all the work that Apple's doing, and for all their claims that we can do a lot of stuff, machine learning locally, that product I no longer use. It used to be a Dragon Dictate, and that would go through a training session, so it would learn the idiosyncrasies of your voice, and it could model it, and that would boost its accuracy. And for whatever reason, Apple's not doing that. Maybe they never thought of it. Maybe it's patent issues. Maybe it's 12th on their top 3 lists of things to do. Don't know, but I think there is continued improvement, because I'm like you. I find that I'm saying things really clearly, and it just comes up with really really crazy interpretations. I mean, about the only dumber thing is, sometimes is my car, but
Yeah, I've often likened these voice assistants to imagine if you had a secretary who was both hard of hearing and had a learning disability. And that's often how they feel. Although it's like I said, I really feel like, especially over the past year, they've all improved a lot. They're not nearly as frustrating. Right now, my personal preference is towards Amazon's solution, and for one very simple reason, and that's because it has the shortest activation word. I hate to use them, but Hey Siri and Okay Google sound fine, but when you have to say them 20 times a day, it gets to be a mouthful. So just being able to say one word that kind of rolls off the tongue and it's 3 syllables. Yeah, it's 3 syllables. So, I mean, but even then, it's still less of a mouthful than the other activation words. And that's something I wish they would think about more. I appreciate avoiding accidental activations, but, also I don't want to have to say a poem every time I'll have a question for my, fancy speaker.
I have to say, to answer Mark's question, I have experience, or Josh's, excuse me. I have experience with both Miss A and Miss S, and
these sound like mistress names or something.
Well, thanks, Josh.
Or Robert Mueller's unindicted co-conspirators.
Yeah. And Siri, oops, Miss S, yeah, she didn't hear me. Maybe it's because of the HomePod. And Mark, your point about the microphone and the pickups is a perfect one, because that is so much superior to pretty much any of the other devices, and it can be superior a room away compared to Miss A. Miss A, you have to you have to add all these. What do they call them? You have to add the skills. Have to add the skills to do a lot of these things, and that's something that the other two you don't have to do. So I think that gives both Google and Apple a bit of a leg up.
How do you add skills? Is it more complicated than just saying, "Hey, Miss A, add skill set for retrieving quotes from the stock market"?
Yeah, I think it's some of them can be a little bit that way, Mark. I mean, I know the last time I added a skill because honestly, some of the skills, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, but some of the skills that are out there being created are, one-off skills that they're not even good proof of concepts. It's just, something crazy like, show me how many moves Keanu Reeves has been in or something. Who cares?
But is it all done verbally?
The last time I did, to be fair about it, though, I don't know. You may be able to add some now verbally. Most of the time, when I was still bothering to add them, I'd have to go into the app and look them up.
Alexa offers, I said it again. Anyway, Amazon offers, I keep doing it. Amazon offers about three different ways to do it. You can use the iOS app and install them. There's a website you can go to and do it. And there's some you can install with a voice command, but there's a limitation to that. Like if you have to have a login, like for instance, you couldn't install, say, the Spotify app, or I guess skill would be the word there. You can't install the Spotify skill because you have to have a login for that, or the Apple Music skill. You can't install that because again, you have to log into Apple for that. But like the really basic ones, you can install with a voice command. But that definitely isn't one advantage Google has over Alexa, over Amazon. There is that on Google you don't have to install these things. But on the flip side, if Google doesn't support something, then you don't have any way of adding that yourself. And these developers have to work out partnerships with Google. There isn't a clear way to add capabilities to that platform. But to be fair to Google, they've added a lot of that stuff and even more without having, even without it being quite as open. Like, for instance, one of my favorite things about Alexa is that a lot of radio stations have skills for their radio station. But Google tends to have those built in anyway. So I find it's not a problem.
Yeah, I prefer Apple's solution, maybe we'll try to use the company names that may save us all. I prefer Apple's solution. It seems to me to be the most accurate. But again, to be fair about it, I'm not asking. This whole study intrigued me because they were asking objective questions. How many moons does Jupiter have? And okay, there's an objective answer to that. And that's fine, but I don't find myself asking any of the devices those kind of questions. It's more home control. It's more adding to my notes. It's more setting alarms or reminders or those kind of things. And so maybe it's just the way I personally am using it. But I mean, do you guys ask any of these systems, interesting questions? I mean, Mark, like we were talking pre-show, maybe you might ask it something about the stock market, but beyond that, I just don't think of things to ask it.
I ask about weather. I'll ask what the temperature is outside. If I were more into the stock market, I probably would ask about that every now and then. I don't tend to ask about general news topics because I don't want a big old long spiel. That's one of those things I'll just, I'll go to Apple News or Yahoo or I don't know, somewhere for. I'm like you. I typically use it more for commands. Now, I will use it for trivia questions if they come up in conversation and it's just convenient. It's also usually kind of a fun party thing in and of itself to see, hey, which one of these things gets it right? Because I have Alexa, Google, and Siri all in my house, and so sometimes it can be funny to see which one. Now, I will say that's one thing Siri really screws up on. Like half the time, it just does a web search instead of giving me an answer, while both Alexa and Google are better about giving me an answer. And it seems like Google has the edge there for obvious reasons, but they both do pretty good, at least compared to Apple.
Sorry, I don't know that.
And you mean giving verbal answers, Josh?
What's that?
You mean giving verbal answers?
Right. Just like ask a question, get an answer.
Right.
Yeah. So again, it depends on what you're trying to do, and I'll get to the question of the list in a moment, Chuck. But very narrowly, just picking on what you and Josh were saying, I find a lot of time it's very command oriented. Like you tell create a certain event or create a certain calendar or set a timer for 7 minutes, or things like that. Or my comment, I think probably my most asked questions over the past couple of years is, what's the internal temperature for cooking beef or chicken? And I just don't remember it, but it always comes up on my iPhone. So it's great for that. I use it sometimes. Some of the things about the quality answer, there's two parts there. One is, yes, it does a web search, and Siri gives you some sort of visual dialogue where you can see responses from different search engines. Obviously, Google comes back and will recite something. Now, I think it's unfair to say that Siri is dumber than the others because she doesn't give a voice response. So I think that's a little bit out of bounds. Then the other thing is, really, I have not seen the full 1,000 questions. I don't know if it's been available anywhere online. Have either of you seen them?
No, just occasional example questions, but no.
Yeah, so it's without really seeing them, it's hard to know, because when checking things and checking status of airplanes and things, I get my questions answered. So in that regard, I wouldn't say it's necessarily dumb. To me, the biggest thing is voice transcription accuracy. Like you're trying to dictate a text or an email, and you get some really crazy things. And if you don't, and the problem is, if you're driving a car and you're doing something like that, you can't proofread it. You have to send it out with a follow up. Sorry for the crazies. I was dictating to Siri, and off it goes. And I think maybe just cracking back to the opening question of, do we expect too much? Maybe we do, but I think ultimately I would say no, we don't, because I think it's that sense of demanding more that pushes so much of engineering and technology forward. So, if we want to take a big story arc, I think that's just what moves the human race forward. I think in specific cases, yes, maybe it's unfair to a certain product or a certain company, but again, on that, I would say it's unless the company sets the expectation of the user, they're guilty, and they may think that it's unfair. They're criticized because users are asking for all sorts of stuff and capabilities, but and Apple, I think, is particularly bad of this. They throw all these very sophisticated products out there with no guidance on it. And I know Josh writes books about it, as well as Joe and the other authors that take control. All these seemingly simple apps that get thrown out there with no guidance from Apple, other than here it is. This is the greatest thing, and let's show you 3 hot features at WWDC or an Apple launch event. And I think in that regard, as consumers, as users and buyers of products, I don't think we can ever have standards that are too high.
Interesting. Josh, how do you feel about it? I'll save my opinions for third, but how do you feel about it? Are we and you can talk about the smart speakers, you can talk about anything, but are we expecting too much out of these?
No, I don't think so at all. And I think Mark has a good point in that, this is what helps drive the industry forward. People do have high expectations. But also, I think after 20 years of daily computer use for many Western households, I think people have very good expectations of what they can expect from a computer. It's like that scene in Star Trek 4. They go back in time and Scotty's trying to talk to his mouse and say hello. I think if you told somebody in 1985, and like, hey, this is a computer you can talk to, they would probably try to say all kinds of crazy things to it. And I think in 2018, most people who are familiar with these things would know, oh, yeah, well, it's sort of like a command line, and there's a certain set of things it can actually understand. We've all kind of become computer scientists in that regard. But even then, this is one of those things I keep coming back to in my own personal life. And I've gotten to the point where I ask my wife all the time, remember when things worked? Because it feels like to me, over the past decade or so, the reliability of technology has taken a huge nosedive. And maybe that's unfair. And the capability has improved at least somewhat, but it feels like reliability has really gone downhill with what little capability that's improved. Just give you one example. The entire reason I went from Android to an iPhone was because somebody was trying to call me on my Droid, and the whole phone locked up when I was trying to receive a phone call. I was like, "This is unacceptable. I'm going to iPhone." And now my iPhone locks up all the time when I get phone calls. It's just a regular, and I'm not jailbroken or anything else. It's just a thing that happens. Hasn't happened in a while, to be fair. But just little things like that. Like, for instance, right now I have a smart light behind me. HomeKit can't connect to it. No idea why. Then again, that's a little more edge technology because it's smart. But hey, smart bulbs aren't exactly new either. So I don't think it's that futuristic. But it just feels like in general, software quality has really declined. Mojave is a really good example. I've heard all sorts of nightmare stories from people who've upgraded Mojave and had all kinds of problems compared to older versions of Mac OS. And of course, not to get too far from the weeds, but they have these so-called marzipan apps that are ported from iOS and use that framework. And even the biggest Apple defenders have said these don't feel like Mac apps. They don't fit in right. They're not crafted very well. It just feels like a lot of stuff in the tech industry is very slapdash now compared to where it was. So even while we have amazing things like, I have 2 free wiretap, listening devices, smart speakers in my house that can receive voice commands and do things based on that, which is a really cool technology. But it feels like in general, a lot of stuff just doesn't work as well as it used to. I'm not sure we're getting a good deal in that trade-off.
Okay, so you kind of got to the heart of where I wanted to go here, because there are times I agree with you that it feels like things don't just work the way they used to. And then I turn around and think, yeah, but I'm trying to do more. And I'm not sure that I'm not maybe fooling myself a little bit, because did it ever work exactly that well? And one of my favorite examples for this discussion is just automobiles. I mean, when I was a kid and we would go on vacation and be on the road, it was not an uncommon thing. And I'm not going to reveal what years we're talking about here, but it was a ways back. It was not an uncommon thing to see a lot of cars broken down, a lot of cars overheating on a hot summer day. And now you never see that, or almost never see that. And so, has it really gotten better, and our expectations have gotten so much more, or are we? I mean, is there a decline in the quality of this stuff? Because I think about what I used to be able to do, at any given point in my life versus what I can do now with the technology. And I mean, hey, letters still get lost by the post office, and packages still get lost by the post office. And that's supposed to be, a pretty reliable system, allegedly. So I don't know. I mean, sure, I get just as frustrated. I was saying again before the show that I was talking to someone today who was frustrated because they had sent a text message or tried to send it over the weekend. They thought it had gone, and it's still stuck several days later on 98%. It won't go out. It just won't. It's not affecting the ability to send and receive other texts, but it's just stuck right there. I know I've had some frustrations with some of the non-Apple Office software that is a standard, where something just plain doesn't work at all. I mean, I tried to search in my email on that software, and literally nothing comes up. And I'm sitting there looking at a message with my search term in it, and it doesn't acknowledge it. And
Right.
so that's where you hit a real frustration, when it just seems to completely ignore you. But I think it's an interesting discussion. I'd love to hear from the listeners too, as to what their level of satisfaction is, not with Apple or Amazon or Google or whatever, but just across the board. Is it more frustrating? Is it worth not doing it with a computer?
Oh, I don't know if I would go that far, but I think you make an interesting point, which is I think that we do have a sliding scale of expectations, so that as we get more capability, we expect more and more out of the tools and the systems that we use. I think some of this is maybe also endemic to the way our nervous systems as Homo sapiens is built. That we're not really good at understanding things in the abstract, but we're very well wired to see differences between things. That's how, our auditory system, we know, okay, noise over there versus down there. We're really finely attuned to identify that. And all that is milliseconds or tenths of milliseconds of, difference, in phase, for the noise arriving at the two ears, that we can locate it somewhere. Similar thing for weight, or coolness, and other temperatures and other sensory experiences. So I think maybe what we're seeing is that so many things work so well that when something is not working, it is the thing that is the differential sensory input, and is maybe feeling much more painful, because so much other stuff does go well that it really sticks out. But be that as it may, the software and product companies, are on this treadmill of ever higher and higher and higher expectations, and they have to live with them, or a lot of other people are going to say, this device locked up, can't get a phone, can't get a text, toss it in the garbage, and defect and go to the other ecosystem. That's I don't know how wide that sort of shift is and how possible it is, but that's certainly, I think, the emotional temperature that a lot of people have when they just fly off, in rage when something doesn't work.
And the fallacy, of course, is that the other ecosystem, platform, whatever, probably is no better. And if we're talking about Apple versus some others, objectively may not be as good. This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Opsgenie by Atlassian. With Opsgenie, your next incident doesn't stand a chance. If you visit Opsgenie.com right now, you can sign up for a free account and then add up to 5 team members for free. Why would you want to do that? Because incidents occur, no matter how hard you try to prevent them. Sometimes they happen because of something you did, or something you didn't do. Or maybe you had nothing to do with it. The bottom line is that your service is disrupted, your customers aren't being served, and you need to get it taken care of as soon as possible. And that's where Opsgenie comes in. With Opsgenie, your dev and ops teams get notified of the problem quickly. But in a global 24/7, 365, everyone always on the go world, that's not enough. The right people need to be notified. The team in Sydney may be winding down while the team in Paris is just getting started. Or the critical team member in London may be on vacation. And let's not forget weekends. Opsgenie takes care of that by making sure that, through a series of smart scheduling options, the team that is awake and on the job is alerted. And if they can't fix the problem quickly, Opsgenie can quickly escalate the problem so more resources can be brought to bear. Your customers don't want interruptions. You don't want interruptions. When you and your team are armed with Opsgenie, issues are addressed faster and more efficiently. And that's exactly what it takes to meet today's business expectations. Opsgenie by Atlassian at Opsgenie.com. Sign up for your free account with your 5 team members now and find out what it can do for you. With Opsgenie, your next incident doesn't stand a chance. Thanks to Opsgenie for their support of Mac Voices.
I'd love to see some real world data on that, but I'm not sure exactly how you collect that other than just user surveys over a matter of time. I can definitely say things are and now right here, I'm just talking about computers in general, computers and software. Automobiles, of course, have made amazing progress over the past 20, 30 years. My Toyota Corolla is almost 10 years old and know it other than the fact it's a little beat up.
Really broken in.
Right. I just now got it broke in. But now you go back to the 90s, and of course, blue screen of death was a constant companion then, slowdowns, things like that. It was very much a cutting edge kind of technology even then. Also, I get a sense too, it's not just a declining reliability. I also feel like the tech industry as a whole is sort of lost in the wilderness. And I hate to invoke the name, but it feels like that's been the case ever since we lost Steve Jobs. And you look back over his history, and he helped drive the entire personal computer revolution all the way from the beginning in the 70s until his death. And then after that, it seems like no one else has many great ideas. And it seems like, if anything, the ideas turn more toward, how can we use our technology to control our users? How much can we lock things down? I would argue the Mac's headed in this direction, where only Apple-approved programs can be run on the Mac, which is probably the day I leave the Mac. But Windows has been Microsoft's been talking about doing the same thing with Windows. And of course, all in the name of security, as all such things are. We're getting to the point, where, you look back just a few years in tech and things always look brighter in the future. And right now, and maybe this is just me, so feel free to correct me, but it feels like, the future doesn't look quite as bright as the past in technology. And, I'm not sure what the fix for that is. And, is it a lack of innovation, or did we just hit the end of a natural road? Or, are people's hearts darker than they were a few years ago? And I'm not really sure, but that's just kind of the sense I have. And not only, and it also feels like, reliability is decreasing. Seems like these companies are more focused on other things than on quality of product. And the innovations aren't, as free flowing as they once were. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
So there's a whole bunch of issues there wrapped up. If we unpeel that onion, a layer at a time, about software and about software quality. I suppose my general sense is I don't think it's any better or worse than it was a couple of years ago. So in that regard, I don't really see any difference, any marked decline, or any significant improvement or change either way. The other thing about your point about innovation, um, I think for a long time, I think that was sort of the criticism Apple was under from 2011 through maybe 2014, 2015, when in the immediate aftermath after Jobs passed, is I think what we saw was, with the rise of mobile devices, we saw the trends that had started 30 years earlier. You sort of reach their natural limit, right? To almost everybody carrying a device like this, whatever size screen it is. So I think that's all just part of one long arc of widespread distribution of computing into every pocket, as well as multiple pockets and desktops and things around the world. So the other thing is, I think that technology innovation it's not a constant process. Like evolution itself, you have broad periods where you have some sort of equilibrium, and then you have an innovation, and you have a sudden change. And I think we're living again at the end of that sort of period. I know that if I look back at it, I haven't bought a Mac for 3.5 years ago was when I bought my last Mac. And typically before that, I was buying at least one Mac a year. And part of that is the product category has matured to the point where the incremental innovations in the product is not worth it to me. So I spend other things. And to me, the biggest probably the biggest new category was for the Apple iPod. And listeners may have heard me talk about this twice before with Chuck, most recently on one of the gift episodes. To me, that was a brand new category that I've really enjoyed. Also, Endeavor got an iPad Pro. It finally, I think, got to the point where the handwriting capability and the support by apps developers caught up with where it should have been. What was it, 3 years ago when they first introduced the Apple Pencil? And I think that's a point, I definitely would amplify something Josh was saying, which is, I think that's the difference of, Steve Jobs not being there. I mean, I was shocked literally a year later after, the original iPad, there was no native Apple apps would take advantage of the pencil. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. I mean, that just distorts the brand. So, I think in that regard, it's we need to hold Apple and other manufacturers to a higher standard that don't roll out crap and say, oh well, we'll fix it, and then roll it out and it take 2 years to finally catch up. No, just keep that inside of your company and don't unleash it on the public and on your buyers, the people who give you money, until it's fully baked. And I think that's one of the things that may again lead to this general overall sense of as quality declined is people can see all sorts of junk on the webs and websites. Yes, they can get better in a period of 6 weeks, but physical products where you have software and firmware updates and things, they can't move at that same velocity. And as a manufacturer, you're at risk of really tarnishing your image by shipping stuff before it's ready.
But you know what, Mark? I agree with so much you said there, and yet there's so much pressure on everyone. Now we're all going to. I'm headed to CES in Las Vegas in a couple weeks. A couple weeks, and what's going to happen. We're going to interview a lot of people. We're going to see a lot of things, and they're not going to become available until June, July, August, September, or later, if in some cases they ever become available at all. And yet they're rolling them out. There's so much pressure to get these things announced before their time and before they really are ready. I'm with you. First of all, it doesn't make any sense to me, because if I have competition, why would I want to announce to my competition what I'm working on until I'm ready to bring it to market? And yet we will see literally hundreds of booths doing exactly that. And so I don't know where to lay the blame here. Is it on us? Is it on the media for demanding that if you don't have a story to tell, we're not going to tell anything about you. We're going to move on to the next guy who is willing to show us this whiz bang thing that's not going to be available in 9 months, if it ever is.
Well, the whole topic of media saturation could make an episode in and of itself, and that's one of those things on my mind lately. And I think it ties, honestly, I think it kind of ties into all this, because I think it ties into our perceptions of things. And people definitely seem to have a more dour outlook in 2018, soon to be 2019, than they did, say, in 2011. And, there's so many media outlets vying for attention, and negativity, of course, attracts more attention than positivity. And so, when you have millions of voices all screaming for attention, it's usually the most negative and outrageous things that get the most attention. And so you see a lot of people in the media, saying crazier and crazier and wilder things all the time. And I often ask myself, do these people actually believe these things they're saying, or are they just trying to get someone to pay attention to them? But, of course, like I said, that's a whole other episode in of itself.
Yeah. Right.
No,
but
I
think part of it is this is an evolutionary struggle to survive. Let's look at it in really Darwinian terms. Let's shift our perspective on it. So, there's all these towering trees, and there's a lot of stuff. A lot of battle for life, and genetic innovation at the floor of the forest, and a lot of that stuff, 80, 90, 95, 99% of it is just not going to make it. It's just going to die and become mulch. So as a consumer, you really need to think, okay, 10 things Apple must do to succeed in 2019. Do you really want to read somebody's opinion on that? If not, just keep looking for the 10 things Trump has got to do in 2019, or similar sense of just moderating your consumption of just your media and your news intake, because you read this stuff, it stirs emotional response, some positive, some negative. On the whole, is it worth it? I don't know. That's a personal question, but for the most obvious clickbait stuff, just ignore it. Just punish it.
But to go
point, punish it.
To go back to the software,
punish it. Ignore it.
Yeah, well, as much as possible. Support tidbits. To go back to the software quality thing, something I've heard from a lot of older engineers. I don't know enough about it to really comment on it intelligently, but it makes sense to me. But one of the things I've heard is that back in the old days, you had to code a lot closer to the hardware. You had to use C, or you use an assembler language of some kind. And so, and you also had to be a lot more efficient, because computers didn't have the resources they did now. And these days you have various abstraction layers, and you have various more user-friendly programming languages that aren't as resource efficient. And also, it's not as difficult to become a coder. And of course, we see a big push in the industry to get more and more people. Everyone can code, because we want to pay them lower wages eventually. But again, that's another show. But I get the sense that if software feels not as reliable as it used to be, that's probably part of it, because we have the resources that we can waste now on abstraction layers that make things easier for perhaps less skilled people. I'm not saying that that's necessarily entirely a bad thing. I think it is good to open up development to more people. I certainly appreciate it, and I wouldn't call myself a coder, but I can bang out a script every now and again. But I do think it has an effect on the software we use every day. For instance, iOS. In retrospect, iOS was getting terribly bloated, especially 7 through 11, and they had to focus the entire update, iOS 12, to stripping things down and making things more efficient. And what a difference it made. I had an iPhone 6 that was unusable literally unusable with iOS 11. And once I struggled through installing iOS 12 on it, it was instantly that much better. So I don't think things are hopeless, but I do wonder how many software products are we using every day that were cranked out by inexperienced people with the philosophy of move fast and break things. How much better could things be if there was a little more dedication to quality, at least going back every now and then and fixing up the messes we've made.
I'm with you, Josh. I'm with you. I think that's a problem. I think the coding is not as tight. And again, sometimes just for the plain pressure of getting new features out there. And we've talked endlessly on the show about programs that, they're on version 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe more. And there's been no dedicated effort to slim them down, to cut away some of the cruft, because nobody wants to take the risk the ire of their users by deleting that one feature that a small percentage of the population uses, but that small percentage of the population will become super vocal because it got deleted. And it's one reason I've got a lot of respect for what Apple did with Final Cut and with the iWork suite of apps, that they just ripped them right down to the ground and started to build them back up. Yeah, there were features missing, but they also had some good reasons that we've covered on the show before about why they did it. But that took they knew they were going to take a lot of heat for it, and they did. But I think at the end of the day, they've built something better that will last longer and be more reliable for all of us.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something I've been wanting to address ever since I summoned the Steve Jobs word, is that, in defense of Tim Cook's Apple, which I think gets a little more grief than it deserves. But, one of the things, they had to do was a lot of products that had kind of deteriorated under the Jobs era. And you mentioned a few right there, like Final Cut. iWork was one. I had the worst time trying to sync things. You remember trying to sync things between the Mac and iOS versions of iWork, and you get error messages like, this won't work right, this won't work right, this is going to break. And they had to take drastic measures to fix that. And it took a long time to reach feature parity with the older versions, and that irritated a lot of users. But I think in the long run, those moves have been worth it. And so those particular products that we mentioned, I think for the most part, are better than they were a decade ago, and largely, and they did have to retool for this era of, living in the cloud and moving between mobile and desktop, and that was a huge challenge. And I don't want to discount that, nor the accomplishments and the progress Apple's made there. Even as I think, I try to be more critical of things like operating systems, which that technology hasn't changed a whole awful lot in a few years, and things like that. But I mean, there are some serious challenges that have cropped up in this past decade. Cloud synchronization, voice recognition, artificial intelligence. These are enormous problems that have been plaguing the computer industry for 40, 50 years or more.
And it feels like you've brought it full circle, Josh, because that's kind of where we started, that our expectations have changed because there's so much more to do. And so I'll borrow Mark's thing of the onion. The onion, I mean, it just got a whole lot more layers to peel back to try to make successful apps, reliable apps, useful apps, and apps that can compete, and do so in a timely fashion and get them out to us and have them do what we want them to do. So it's so easy to just say, oh, Apple or Google or Amazon or Microsoft or Adobe or pick any big software house to say, oh, they're not what they used to be. Well, I think it's a more complex question than that.
That being said, it's almost 2019. Where is my flying car and my replicant? Okay. There were specific promises made and not delivered.
In which order do you want them, Josh?
Oh, well, I guess the flying car. It seems slightly less likely to kill me.
Okay, good. Mark, do you have any thoughts on where we're taking this?
Well, I mean, certainly software has always been about a battle of complexity. And it is true that there's a lot of libraries out there, and people use them maybe just because it's cool. That's what the cool kids and cool developers do, without fully being aware of them. And one thing we see is that the size of web pages keep getting more and more bloated as they get stuffed with all sorts of trackers and beacons for ad servers, and all sorts of JavaScript libraries and everything else that gets included. So I think it's good that Apple, what was it, about a year, 18 months ago, they basically sunsetted the life for 32-bit apps on iOS, and now on Mojave, when they're still allowing 32-bit apps to run, but clearly I think that has only a 12-month sort of life cycle. I wouldn't be surprised that next significant Mac OS upgrade next year, that 32-bit legacy apps just are not permitted to run. So I think that's Apple's strength of their ability to sort of purify and force evolution of apps in their ecosystem, whereas Redmond for a long time has always been criticized that they would absolutely change absolutely nothing because they might hurt that one person who has nothing, no economic buying power, is never going to buy another system, but just has a very loud voice. This sort of tension between features and simplicity is one thing that goes back and forth, because a lot of people say, oh, they like the variety of apps in the either iOS or the Mac ecosystem because they have a lot of things that are very simple and optimized for a particular task. That sort of directly contradicts people who say, oh, well, I'm mad at this manufacturer because they came out with a new version and they took away this support for this one feature that's critical to my workflow. So this is just tension, I think, that is a sign of how the industry moves forward. Other than that, I think it's just sort of the human condition. I don't expect much more. But I think Josh made a point, which is if you look at what these systems are doing, and again, maybe the perceived stasis in the operating system is, all this so-called machine learning capabilities. As the theory's been out there for quite a long time, but it's extremely computationally intensive. And we're now having capability that you can have a device in your pocket that has enough compute power that it can start to make sense of the stochastic universe to figure out, was this sound profile coming in did Josh, that's Josh, and we recognize him, he's saying this word, because he's done this, with 99.978 percent accuracy over the past 38 days. So that sort of personalization, that's a marked difference in terms of how these systems are developed. Because historically, people used to say that programming a computer is like writing a letter to an idiot. The idiot is very precise; it will do exactly what it's told. But if you don't specify every condition, something will blow up and you get unexpected results. And I think the thing about sort of machine learning is dealing with this sort of probabilistic universe, that there's a whole variety of potential outcomes or a whole variety of potential inputs, and it can start to deal with it. And again, one thing that may separate the good systems from the poor ones out there is does it make an assumption and just give you the wrong word, or would it come back and tell you, hey, Mark, I didn't understand that third word. Did you mean to say jewel or jewelry or jury? Because Siri earlier today transcribed my creating a Mac jury episode as a Mac jewelry episode.
No, we don't do that. We don't do that.
But again, this is an example of the sort of stuff that should be can be done, can be figured out. Yeah, I don't know if how many of you use Finder for launching as an app launcher. It learns over time which apps you mean when you enter one key or I don't need more than two keys to launch anything. And again, that's something that's learned behavior. And I think that's a lot of what people seem to be expecting when they're criticizing, saying Siri or Alexa or Google, or smart or dumb. It's sort of that contextual understanding of what it is somebody's trying to do and how it responds to that person.
And you bring up a great point, because I find that in issuing commands around my house, that the Amazon device will fail to parse it and will ask me to clarify, and the Apple device is much more likely to go ahead and try to execute a command, and that's a difference that a programmer or a committee or something made at some point. And honestly, I think I find the constant requests for clarification from the Amazon device more annoying than if the Apple device just doesn't do it. Maybe because I think I believe that I'm the one that made the mistake. Maybe I didn't say it loud enough. Maybe I didn't say it clearly enough. But with the Amazon device, it clearly heard something and it wasn't able to parse it, and I get annoyed. And that's my reaction. You all may have different reactions, and it's probably not fair if it matters if you're fair to these things, but that's probably not a fair thing, but that's my very human reaction.
Again, it's how does the manufacturer, what's their vision of how it interacts with a human operator? It appears that say Apple, Siri versus Alexa, they have two different. Oh, I wasn't sure, I'll ask. Versus, okay, well, I'll do something, and the boss will clean up afterwards.
Yeah. Guys, I don't know if we've really solved anything, but it's a discussion I wanted to have, just because it feels like there are frustration levels building with all of us, and not just the audience, but us as well. And sometimes I try to step back and say, gee, am I being realistic? Am I being reasonable with this? And sometimes the answer is no. And then I think about what Mark said early on, that this is the way that pushes the industry forward. And so maybe you need to be demanding. And one other thing I wanted to add too, Mark, you made the point about 32-bit apps. Folks, now's the time, because you probably have a year, give or take, maybe less. If you have a developer who has an app that is mission critical for you, you need to be getting in touch with them and saying, what are you doing about making this app 64-bit compatible? It fascinates me, big software developers and small, how they have these warnings from Apple that Apple says, it's coming, and then on launch day, oh, well, we didn't get around to it yet. And that's borderline unforgivable in my mind. So, editorial comment there at the end. Mark, where can we find you when you're not here? Because this will probably be the last time we get together for 2018, but I expect to see you back here in 2019 plenty. But where will you be in between?
Oh, I'll be in California. I'll be on the West Coast. The best way is Twitter to contact me. It's at Mark Fuccio, MarkFuccio, all one word, all lowercase.
Great. Thanks so much for being here, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Chuck, and to you, Josh.
You too, Mark.
Josh, how about you? I know where to find you, but let's make sure everybody does.
My articles you can find at tidbits.com. My books, including my new Take Control notes, are at takecontrolbooks.com. And if you like bad tweets like Mark does, and Chuck does also, you can follow me on Twitter at JCenters, JCenters.
I don't think your tweets are that bad, Josh.
They've been better lately.
Yeah, The one today, the advice to your younger self, I loved. So
buy Apple, skip college.
Yeah, I if you did it right, you'd be way ahead. Hey, thanks for being here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. Again, this is not one of those episodes that was designed to solve anything, but just to ask some questions, maybe get you to think a little bit as we head into 2019. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our MacVoices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple Tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep MacVoices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.